Without any evidence, the IDF says Iran helped with this. Iran did this. Are we marching ourselves into a wider war with Iran? The evidence would make us believe, yes, maybe we are going into war with Iran. Um, let's kind of break this down a little bit more. First of all, you've got people in the United States who absolutely want to go to war. All they've ever wanted is war with Iran. War, 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 war. Here's Lindsey Graham talking about how he wants to go to war and he doesn't even need any evidence of it.
What I would do is I would bomb Iran's oil infrastructure. The money financing terrorism comes from Iran. It's time for this terrorist state to pay a price for financing and supporting all this chaos. Yes, if you're the Iranians, if it were up to me, this war escalates, I'm coming after you.
I think this is what I'm trying to clarify here, because I'm wondering if
us and Israel,
the United States and
Israel.
Israel.
I want to be crystal clear.
The United. Let me just understand you, just to be clear. You're saying that you would want the United States and Israel to bomb Iran, even in the absence of direct evidence of their involvement in this attack.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't need direct evidence of their attack. Yeah, we want to bomb Iran. Israel and the United States are going to gang up and bomb Iran. So here's some other reports that have come out is that the United States is holding off on letting the IDF actually go in. There's been a lot of talk about invading Gaza, going into Gaza, we're going into Gaza, but then this ground invasion hasn't happened. And now it's been confirmed that the reason why the ground invasion isn't happening is because the United States wants to hold off for a wider war. The United States wants to get in position and make sure that they're ready for what they believe will break out into a wider war. Do we have something on that? Thought that we had grabbed that there was actually this was actually reported on. So nonetheless, we'll just kind of move forward then. So there's these reports that the United States wants to go into a wider war with Iran, and that is why Israel is not going into Gaza. You've got Lindsey Graham posturing. He's been posturing for a really, really long time about this, saying that he wants to go to war with Iran. A lot of them have been wanting to go to war with Iran. Here it is. This is Yonatan Tuval. He says, U.S. officials confirmed to me that key reason for IDF ground invasion delay is U.S. request to complete preps for broader conflict. Preps include deployment of THAAD and Patriot air defense systems in Gulf, possibly also Jordan and northern Iraq, and arrival of USS Ike and 2,000 Marines. THAAD stands for Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. This is an American anti-ballistic missile defense system designed to shoot down short, medium, and intermediate range ballistic missiles in their terminal phase, which is their descent or their re-entry phase. So that is what they're apparently looking to do. So we're preparing and hunkering down for a potential wider war. There's people salivating at the mouth, chomping at the bit. Here's where it gets really interesting about the whole thing. So let's go back for a minute and think about that phone call. So there's that phone call that I just told you about of the Israeli Defense Forces releasing Hamas fighter calling his mom and dad, saying, look, I'm a hero, I'm a hero, I'm a hero. They clearly have been able to intercept this phone call. We also had an earlier phone call recording from Israel when they needed to prove that the missile that hit the hospital was not one of theirs. So they released a phone call of two fighters saying, it was us, that was ours. Where did it come from? Behind the cemetery? What? Oh, right. So they had this phone call. Both of these phone calls raised some eyebrows, because the question there is, why did it take you so long to get to the defense of these people who were under Hamas control in the kibbutz and in these various places? They were under siege and held captive for 7 to 12 hours. And apparently this attack took you by surprise. You didn't know anything about this attack. Yet you have these quickly intercepted phone calls. You've been able to intercept phone calls because you were surveilling. How were you? So either you faked those phone calls, that's always a possibility, or you had this surveillance and you just sat on it. You almost, you turned a blind eye to the fact that this attack could happen. if that's the truth, if you turned a blind eye, was it you just were negligent and you were thinking it wasn't a serious attack, and you're thinking, we're just going to put our troops on over by the West Bank, and this isn't a real thing. Hard to believe that when the hostages that were just released, now that they've been interviewed, the older ladies that were just released said that clearly Hamas had been planning this for a really long time, that they had all the supplies necessary to take care of all of these people, that it was an elaborate underground tunnel system, and the hostages had everything they needed, and doctors that would check in on them. They had all, these hostages are saying this was planned well in advance because they had everything. So if that's the case, and they were planning this, and Israel has the ability to intercept phone calls, what the hell were they doing? Why were they not paying attention and protecting the people? A lot of people inside of Israel who were attacked at these kibbutz, they asked that same question. Where were you guys? You left us completely defenseless. Where was the IDF? You said that you would protect us, and you weren't there. And not only not there right away, but not there for hours upon hours upon hours upon hours. No one in sight. Israel's not a big country. You don't have to travel far to get from one side to the other. So there's a lot of questions about that. Were they just negligent, and they really were turning a blind eye, and they're not that great of forces? They're just kind of, doping around like idiots, like, oh, Hamas says they're going to attack something. Don't pay any attention to it. Nothing serious there. I mean, were they that ignorant to this entire thing, or was this a negligence that goes beyond that, thinking that in order to get the country to go to war, Israel's been wanting to go to war with Iran for a really long time, in order to motivate people to want to do that, in order to motivate the world to want to help you with something like that, you have to have an atrocious attack on you. We saw that in the United States after 9/11. After 9/11, the country was very motivated to go to war. After Pearl Harbor, the country was very motivated to go to war. Interestingly, those were the two attacks that this attack was continually compared to right after it happened. Online, on social media, all throughout the media, the mainstream media, you would see Israel just had their Pearl Harbor moment, leading the United States, Pearl Harbor did, into World War II. So Israel has their Pearl Harbor moment. What is that supposed to mean? We're leading into a big war against big nations. Did Israel allow this attack to happen in order to facilitate an end goal that they've wanted for a really long time, which is war with Iran, and that war hawks like Lindsey Graham have been wanting for a really long time? Netanyahu is unpopular and on his way out. And the one thing that often saves political skin is war. So was this something, a last desperate ditch effort in order to save his political career, is to, well, if I march Israel into a wider war and actually take out the enemies, the people will love me? Possible that he thinks that way. A lot of people in Israel think he does think that way. So now, there's a lot of questions surrounding that at this point, because if we do end up in war, a lot of people are going to be asking what actually led to this. Was it preventable? We're not going to really get answers to that for years and years and years. So are we going to go to war with Iran? They're also, I'm sure, thinking, Israel and the United States were thinking, now would be the most opportune time, if not the only time. This is probably the only moment that Israel and the United States have. If they really want to go to war with Iran, this is the moment, and it's the only moment. And the reason is, Russia would be the biggest backer of Iran. That would be the big country that would come and help Iran. But Russia's got its own problems right now. They're themselves entrenched in a war with Ukraine, and it's not just a proxy war, it's an actual war. They're on the ground, boots on the ground, fighting a war. They do not have the bandwidth or the capacity to go and then fight on behalf of Iran or go and fight on behalf of Syria. They can't stretch themselves that thin. So Iran is left a bit defenseless besides its own defense that it can handle on its own, but it's not going to find that allied support from Russia that it might normally rely on or count on or hope for. So if you want to go to war with Iran, now's the time while Russia's tied up. Secondly, the other reason why you'd want to do it now rather than later is that China has not built up the military capacity to replace Russia or to defend Iran in the way that China will be able to by 2030. So reports are by 2030, China is going to have massively expanded their military capability. If that's the case, then you want to do this sort of war with Iran. You'd want to do that now and not later when China actually can step up and actually do more to help Iran. So was this a sort of a planned, I mean, it would be a smart plan if that is your goal. So think like a warmonger. Think like somebody who really, really wants war with Iran. If you really, really want that and that is your end goal, you're thinking, all right, we got to get Russia entangled up in something. And we got to keep them tied up. And then what we've got to do is make sure we do this before China gets any bigger. And then we've got to have an attack on Israel that is shocking to the world, to where everybody wants to rush to their defense, the same way after 9/11 on the United States. And that would then give us the green light to go to war with Iran. And as you hear with Lindsey Graham, we don't even need to have any evidence that Iran was involved at all. All we have to do is just claim they back these people. They back Hamas, and because they back Hamas, we're going to go to war with Iran. Another thing I want to point out is that it's just come out, it's been confirmed that Ukraine officials actually tried to accept a peace agreement with Russia. They wanted to accept neutrality, but it was rejected by the Biden administration in Washington. David Sachs tweeted this out, saying, confirmed former general leader Gerard Schroeder confirms that a peace deal could have been made at Istanbul. Ukrainian officials were willing to accept neutrality, but this was rejected by the Biden administration in Washington. And here's the piece. It says, Ukrainian president, down at the bottom, Gerald Schroeder, shows a page from the Bild newspaper with the title, Finally, Peace in Sight. It says Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky himself had already hired or hinted at concessions for negotiations. He no longer insists on his country's ascension to NATO, he told the U.S. broadcaster ABC, and he's also ready for a compromise on Crimea and the breakaway provinces in Donbass. In every negotiation, my goal is to end the war with Russia, Zelensky told Bild. But however, the Biden administration said that they were not allowed, that they weren't going to allow. I don't know how the U.S. has that much control over Ukraine, but they must, they clearly have some serious control, because if Zelensky was actually willing to go to a peace agreement and agree to neutrality, and the United States was the one that said, sorry about your little country, but we're going to have to just let it get destroyed because we've got some other things that we want to take care of. What would those other things be? Well, if you can get Russia tied up in a hot war where they have actual boots on the ground, not a proxy war, but an actual hot war with Russian troops, you now have the green light to go after anyone else who Russia might be backing, who Russia might rush in and help in the event of a war. Iran would be that country. So I would say escalations with Iran and the possibility of going into a hot war with Iran are unfortunately quite high.